We are born into a pattern. We are a pattern. We are a structure that is pre-established through the genes. It is a biological order of our mental functioning. As, for instance, our biological or physiological function follows a pattern.
There is an unavoidable question for any empath who has walked through the hell of a narcissistic relationship. Who will I become after all that I have endured? At first, people often think that survival is enough. Escaping the spiral of manipulation, blocking a phone number, extinguishing a memory. But through the lens of Carl Jung, survival is only the threshold. For what has been absorbed, the darkness, the guilt, the shame, the rage, does not vanish with the breakup. It becomes part of a deeper spiritual journey, the journey of the shadow. The shadow, as Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz described it, is made up of those parts of ourselves that we have not yet become conscious of, stuffed into an invisible bag since childhood. Robert Bly called it the place where we hide both what has been rejected and what has never been acknowledged. When meeting the narcissist, that bag is stretched to its limits, for the narcissist cannot carry their own darkness and forces the empath to bear it instead. Thus, the empath becomes the vessel of both the darkness of the other and the darkness within themselves that had never been faced. But it is precisely there, in the dissolution of the ego, in the nigredo of alchemy, in the symbolic death of the soul, that a new possibility emerges. The question is no longer, how do I escape? But rather, who do I become after having walked through the darkness and returned from the abyss? To understand the journey of the empath, we must return to the origin of that sensitivity. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The empath is the living embodiment of this truth. From early childhood, empaths often grow up in an atmosphere of imbalance, anxious parents, family conflicts, tensions that are never spoken aloud. The child, in order to survive, develops the ability to mirror, to read moods, to catch subtle signals in a glance, in a tone of voice, in the spaces between words. Sensitivity becomes a survival strategy, but a price is paid there. The natural parts of the child, the anger, the courage to say no, the spontaneous joy, are often rejected, stuffed into the bag, described by psychologists. The child learns that in order to be loved, to belong, they must hide their true nature and perform a more acceptable mask. Thus is born the persona, a false self, useful for social adaptation, but never wholly authentic. By adulthood, the empath carries a deep contradiction, outwardly gentle, understanding, always listening, inwardly a bag of shadow growing ever heavier, filled with unacknowledged aspects of the self. And then, when they meet the narcissist, the archetypal encounter occurs. The narcissist is the embodiment of the denied shadow. They construct a dazzling persona to conceal the inner void. They cannot contain their own shame, insecurity, or weakness, and so they project it outward onto others. The empath, prepared since childhood to carry what is not theirs, immediately becomes both mirror and vessel. This is not coincidence, but the pull of opposing poles within the psyche. In Jungian language, it is the meeting of the denied shadow and the vessel of the shadow. And from here, both tragedy and possibility begin. When the empath enters a relationship with the narcissist, they are in truth stepping into an ancient labyrinth, where light and darkness intertwine, where the masks of both begin to crack. The narcissist, as Jung described, lives by the persona, the fabricated divine mask they must maintain to fill the void within. But this mask cannot sustain itself. It needs the energy of others to stay inflated. Thus, every outburst of anger, every criticism, every distortion of reality serves the single purpose of keeping the illusion alive. For the empath, this is a devastating stage. They do not merely perceive, but absorb into their very blood what the narcissist refuses to face. They carry guilt that was never theirs. They swallow shame they did not create. They take in rage like an alien seed planted in the chest, growing into a storm of chaos. In the alchemical psychology Jung so often used as metaphor, this is nigrido, the blackening, the stage where everything decays, dissolves, rots. The seemingly solid self of the empath begins to tremble. The persona, the mask of being the good one, the kind one, the one who always forgives, begins to fracture. They fall into a hall of distorted mirrors, where the narcissist insists that truth is only what the mask proclaims. The empath begins to doubt their own feelings, doubt their memories, even doubt their sanity and their soul. This is the moment when the persona is tested to the breaking point, when you no longer know what is real and what is false. But Jung reminds us, this dissolution is the necessary gateway. Without nigredo, there can never be albedo, whitening, or rubedo, reddening, gold. Only when the old mask collapses can the darkness flood in, and from it a new light be born. What is most striking is that in this moment, it is not only the narcissist's darkness entering the empath, but also the empath's own shadow, stuffed into the bag since childhood, that begins to leak out. Repressed anger, buried fear, the longing to be seen, all of it rises to the surface. Thus, the labyrinth is not merely a journey of confronting the narcissist, but also a journey of confronting the empath's own shadow. In the journey of the soul, there are thresholds from which one cannot turn back. When the empath has absorbed too much darkness, they undergo a symbolic death, the death of the old self. It is not biological destruction, but the collapse of an entire system of beliefs, roles and masks to which they once clung. At the deeper level of the unconscious, this is dismemberment. A familiar image in shamanic myth, the ego torn apart so that the soul can be reconstituted on a new foundation. Jung called this the opening step of individuation, the necessary dissolution by which the self integrates the rejected parts and moves toward a greater wholeness. In that moment, the empath faces two possibilities: to be swallowed by the darkness, becoming the shadow of themselves, lost in despair and disorientation, or to allow the dissolution to become a rite of rebirth, emerging as a new archetype, the wounded healer. From the ashes, the empath is no longer one who can be so easily drawn into illusion. Their light has changed in quality. If before it was a naïve gentleness, easily exploited by others, now it has been tested. It has become discerning, sharp and weighty. They become one who knows darkness not as a concept, but as an experience, one who has walked through the abyss and returned, and therefore no longer fears it. They know the scent of deceit, the taste of false love, the breath of manipulation, and precisely because they have tasted it, they have become immune to it. Here, the knowledge from the second perspective adds another depth. The empath learns not only to recognize the projections of the narcissist, but also to withdraw their own projections. They no longer cast their shadow onto others, but dare to face the truth that within themselves, too, lies the longing to be a savior, the fear of abandonment, the desire to feel important through sacrifice. When this acknowledgement takes place, the cycle closes. The empath is no longer the victim of the narcissist, nor the victim of their own inner darkness. They become sovereign, not in the sense of absolute control, but in reconciliation with both light and shadow within. This is the alchemical turning point. From the lead of suffering, the mercury of confusion, and the sulfur of rage, they forge gold. A gold not only to keep, but to radiate to others again. They are no longer merely the empath. They become the knower of the shadow, a living witness that from death, life can be born anew. Jung once emphasized, the shadow is not only a personal matter, it is part of the collective darkness. When an empath has survived the journey with a narcissist, their transformation does not end with themselves. They carry a wisdom that the community desperately needs, how to live with the shadow rather than deny it. In group and social life, the shadow is always present. It may appear as unspoken rules, silent polarization, or a problem person onto whom the group unconsciously shifts its burden. When the shadow is not acknowledged, even the noblest intentions of a collective can be eroded. This is why groups that begin in solidarity so often fall into division over time. The empath, having walked through the narcissist's darkness, now has new eyes to perceive these unconscious dynamics. They can sense projections floating in the space, see who is carrying whose burden, and notice who is suffocating beneath a persona worn too tightly. Personal experience equips them to become a kind of circle guardian, not by title but by presence. Here, the wisdom of the circle way sheds further light. In a community, the key is not to eliminate darkness, but to create a safe space where it can be named. When projections are recognized, they cease to be weapons and become opportunities for healing. The empath who has learned to withdraw their own projections becomes a mirror for others to follow. To live with the shadow, therefore, is not to be pessimistic or heavy. On the contrary, it is realistic and liberating. The empath no longer seeks a perfect community but contributes to building an honest one, where weakness is acknowledged, anger is named, and difference is held within a safe container rather than hidden away. This is the shift from the personal to the collective, from the empath who once only bore the darkness for themselves, to one who now holds up a mirror so the entire group can see its collective shadow. Their presence becomes a reminder. We are truly connected only when we dare to be honest with both our light and our darkness. Stepping out of the narcissist's labyrinth, many empaths believe they are finally free. But Jung reminds us, every transformation carries with it subtle temptations, new shadows lurking right beside the light that has just emerged. The greatest danger for the empath after surviving is the hardening of the heart. Having endured too much pain, they may swear, "I will never love again. I will never let anyone inside me again." This is the psyche's natural response, a protective armor against suffering. But if that armor becomes permanent, the alchemical process remains incomplete. We do not become gold, we become stone. And stone, though strong, is still a form of lifelessness. Another temptation is to define oneself solely by survival. The empath may fall into the trap of identity. I am the one who was wounded and survived. Though this can bring pride and recognition from others, it is still a new mask, a persona built from the wound. By living too long in the identity of the saved victim, the empath unwittingly limits themselves, as though the wound were the sole center of their being. A third, more subtle temptation is to become the narcissist unconsciously. Jung once said, "What you deny will control you from the shadows." If the empath does not dare to face their own darkness, they risk recreating what once hurt them, seeking validation through sacrifice, manipulating with kindness, or even finding power in saving others. This is the empath's shadow, the hidden narcissist within. The only way to overcome these temptations is integration, not denial. Jung called this the deeper step of individuation, the courage to admit that within oneself there is both light and shadow, both the capacity to love and the potential to manipulate. In this acknowledgement, the empath no longer needs a new mask. They become whole, living without rejecting any part of themselves. And in this wholeness, the empath discovers true freedom, the freedom to open their heart without fear of being devoured, the freedom to love without losing themselves, the freedom to say no without carrying the weight of guilt. At this stage, the empath is no longer merely a survivor, no longer defined by their wounds. They become a living symbol, an archetypal image, reflecting the journey Jung called individuation. Picture the phoenix, its wings engulfed in flames, reduced to ashes, and then rising from that very ash with wings of fire. This is the empath after passing through the hell of the narcissist. What burned and was destroyed was not their soul, but their illusions, the belief that love equals sacrifice, that gentleness has no boundaries, that the self exists only to serve others. All those illusions have been consumed. From the ashes, the empath soars with a new awareness. True love does not demand self-destruction. Or recall Persephone in Greek mythology. Dragged into the underworld by Hades, she ate the pomegranate seeds and from then on belonged to both worlds, of darkness and of light. So it is with the empath. They can never return to their former innocence. But precisely because they carry within them the memory of both realms, they become a mediator, able to enter the darkness of another without losing themselves, and also able to return to the light with a depth they never had before. On the communal level, the image is even more familiar. The empath becomes the circle keeper. They know the shadow is always present in every group, every relationship, and instead of fearing or denying it, they create space for the shadow to be acknowledged. They do not need to mount a pulpit to persuade. Their very presence is a living testimony that darkness can be endured, that pain can become wisdom, that truth, even when brutal, is the path to freedom. This living symbol carries a paradox, both gentle and sharp, both compassionate and uncompromising, both light and shadow. Those who encounter them feel both comforted and challenged. Comforted because the empath listens to pain without judgment. Challenged because their presence exposes the masks others still wear. In Jungian terms, this is the moment when an individual steps beyond the category of social role and becomes a living archetype. They do not merely tell their personal story, they embody the story of the collective, that a human being can shatter without turning to stone, collapse yet rise again, embrace both darkness and light, and still remain whole. So who does the empath become after walking through the narcissist's shadow and rising again? Not merely a survivor, not merely a heart that has suffered, but an initiated soul, a human being who has entered the darkness and returned with eyes that see through illusion. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, the journey in which one is no longer defined by social masks, persona, or by rejected parts, shadow, but begins to become the whole self, both light and dark, both strong and vulnerable. Yet this awakening is not only personal, it is also a call to the community. As the Circle Way reminds us, the shadow does not vanish when we work in groups, build families or enter communities. It is still there, woven into unspoken rules, silent polarizations, unconscious projections. The empath who has gone through the narcissist becomes a living witness to this truth. They see the shadows at work in groups and societies, and they carry the capacity to invite honesty, transparency, and healing. However, the deepest value does not lie in the empath becoming a new savior or a hero. Rather, they become a whole human being, one who does not fear the dark, but neither idolizes the light. One who can love without disappearing, who can give without becoming a sacrifice, who can stand firmly in themselves while still opening to others. And it is precisely this presence that becomes a call to awakening for all of us, to look directly at our own shadow, rather than merely judging the shadow of others, to recognize the projections we cast onto those around us, and to learn to withdraw them, to let our wounds be no longer hidden scars, but sacred inscriptions marking the human journey toward truth. When you do this, you are no longer passive before the darkness. You become its companion, not to be devoured by it, but to let it illuminate the rest of you. This is the very secret Jung pointed to. True light only emerges when we dare to face the darkness. And so, when an empath has passed through the narcissist's hell and emerged on the other side, they are no longer the same empath they once were. They are the keeper of shadow wisdom, the alchemist of the soul, the phoenix of fire, and, above all, the one who knows themselves. This is also the invitation for you, the one who is listening. Dare to look into the darkness within yourself, for there your greatest potential awaits its release.